Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to allow another minute or two for everyone to drop in and get settled, and then we'll get started. Right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Link Center for this shared learning group focused on supporting someone in crisis. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items while we get started today. We do have live captioning and ASL interpreters present today for our meeting. The PowerPoint and documents that we review today will be shared with everyone via email. The session is being recorded, and the recording and the transcript will also be shared. And we invite you to revisit the content and share it with others. Attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, and all attendees are muted. You can see your host and panelist who will be with you today. Please use the chat function in Zoom to communicate with other attendees or with the host during the webinar. You can use the chat by clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen. Do be aware that your name will appear in the chat if you leave a comment. And if you need to, you can change your display name by clicking on those three little dots next to your name and selecting rename. We will have representatives from the Link Center watching the chat and responding throughout the session today. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment privately or anonymously to the host and panelists, you can do that by using the Q&A function, which is right at the bottom of your screen next to chat. Following this webinar, you'll receive an email with material that we go over today. You'll receive the recording and the transcript, and also an evaluation that we ask that you please complete in response to today's shared learning group. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Mary Sowers, who's going to start today's presentation. Mary, it is all yours.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to join us today. We are really excited to be offering our first shared learning groups, especially to this group for individuals with lived experiences joining us today. And the Link Center is funded by the Administration for Community Living, and we are so grateful to them for paying attention to this really important issue. Next slide. So the shared learning groups are going to be offered every few months, and we're going to have 4 different groups to whom it's offered. One for direct support professionals, one for clinical professionals, one for individuals, the one we're having here, and one for families. And the reason that we're having those different audiences is really to make sure that everyone that's impacted or that can have an impact in a positive way on people's lives have the information and resources they need to make an impact. We've kept the information that we're sharing across these meetings the same, but we will change some of the information to target it to the important pieces in your day-to-day life or how you support people. One of the beautiful things about the Link Center is there are lots of partners involved, and we are really lucky that several of our partners helped develop the content for this meeting. And so you'll see and meet today several of our partners that include people with lived experience, people who are researchers, people who work on policy issues, and others, and that are really coming to the table in the hopes of providing additional information and resources to make sure that people with IDD or cognitive disabilities or brain injury or folks who communicate differently have true and meaningful access to mental health support services and clinical services. One thing that's important to note is that we will be recording today and taking notes. So we will be following up in an email and making all of this information available to you. We have encouraged all of the groups to think about revisiting the information if you've got any questions, or to share it with people that you know might be interested in this that might not have been able to attend today. We'll also be making the materials available longer term on a website, and we'll talk a little bit about the status of that later on today. Next slide. Before we go any further, I did want to introduce our colleague, Monica Wayford, who is a member of the steering committee for the Link Center. And just to say a couple of words about the steering committee Link Center is that the steering committee is a committee made up entirely of people who have lived experience of intellectual or developmental disability and mental health support needs, who are helping to make sure that the work of the Link Center remains focused on the things that are most important to the people that need supports. And so we're really grateful to Monica and the other members of the steering committee who have already made such an important impact on our work. And just a couple of things about Monica that I'd like to share before handing over the microphone. Monica has in the past served as a community advocate for victims of violent crime with Central Council Tlingit and Haida Indian tribes in Alaska. She has also served as a coordinator for State Alaska Senior Vocational Services. And importantly, Monica has been a certified peer specialist since 2007. So it's my great honor to introduce Monica Wayford. Thank you, Monica.
So I'm Monica. I am a senior brown woman with a afro on top of my head for our visually impaired group. And I just wanted to say a little bit about lived experience. We who work in the field with lived experience are people who understand from our own experience what some others may go through. And we may be able to connect with them on a level that someone who doesn't have that experience is unable to do. Next slide, please. So at this meeting, we're going to talk about crises and strategies people use to address crises. We want you to take care of yourself and allow silence to be your safe space and feel empowered to do what's necessary for your comfort and care. Excuse me, next slide. We want to talk about the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline. This is a nationwide service. It's a resource for people in crisis who can use the phone, I guess, or I believe it's computerized, but I like to look that up and make sure that there's a chat available. But it's a new service, and we're really happy that it's available to people. Next slide. We're going to talk about crisis planning and supports. The one size does not fit all. Next slide. We celebrate our individuality, our diverse cultures, and our singularity, while we celebrate the discoveries realized in our collective humanity. We know that we are each unique with our own experiences in the world. Next slide. We empathize with experienced traumas that hinder our resilience. A lot of us with lived experience who work in the field, we can experience the same trauma that the person we're trying to assist is experiencing, except for we have to be able to support. Some people have experienced trauma that make it hard to recover and move forward. Next slide. We listen with open minds and compassion and without judgment or blame. Next slide. We reject failure and we embrace hope. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about why I am serving on the steering committee. I've always been an advocate, and I am committed to what I do in helping others. Excuse me. My relationship to crisis as a peer support specialist. I've had 2 suicide attempts without clinical intervention and 2 with. I've been in the shoes of the patient who's been restrained chemically and physically. Overcoming those 2 that I handled myself, those 2 hospitalizations, my motivation has been a treatment plan that I developed for myself because we know ourselves the best. I called it prescription positivity. This plan is an ongoing process of finding value in life. Finding what gives life worth is like discovering new currency for me. It's the value I place on things like having my family close, and being able to make my personal space my own. I determined the reason that I couldn't go through with the plan to end it was because I valued these treasures a lot more than I did the prospect of death. My prescription for finding positivity saved me from sinking into that hopelessness that comes with suicidal ideation. Finding the value of things that made my life worth living gave me the strength I needed to live my life. If I felt that familiar hopelessness that sent me into a crisis, I remembered those things that give my life value. I became a peer support specialist when I learned I had the ability to empathize with while others around me were sympathizing. I realized by being a peer support that I could share the tools that worked for me. My insight gave me the ability to calculate those tools available for my clients' use, and then to contribute to my team's or my own effort to help that person find the worth in their lives. I became focused early on in understanding resources within reach of my client. This included learning about insurances and things that normally a peer doesn't think of, maybe, or, maybe I was a little obsessed with policy. I don't know, but I wanted to find everything available to help people move forward. As a practicing peer, for me, though, it has been a delicate balance between professionalism and self-care. I've had the honor of working with some very supportive teams, and it's important to let people know your limitations. Sometimes my empathy will trigger my own crisis. My environment can be crushing because of my own disability, or it can support me spiritually and physiologically. That's why shared learning to me is a nourishment to my brain and my spirit. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about a lot of things to help each other in the shared learning group. We'd ask that you put your name and any group association or membership you may have in the chat. We're going to talk about what the Link Center is. We're going to talk about why are we talking about supporting someone in crisis. Think about what resources, what trainings, and what information you use or that's available to support someone during and after a crisis. And at the end, we're going to do a group exercise, and we hope we get some volunteers with some really good stuff to share. Thank you.
Monica, thank you so much for setting the stage for our conversation today, and for really sharing your experiences that have been so important in these conversations. So for everyone on the line, one of the things that we hope comes out of these conversations is to understand resources that you have found especially helpful, thinking about how to best support someone in crisis. So we're asking folks to identify, and you can drop these in the chat, but we'll also have an opportunity for folks to share verbally or to come off mute and talk about them later in the discussion. But what are your go-to resources, things that have helped provide you with information you need in your day-to-day life? Maybe they were trainings or a helpful website or a place that you got information to help you plan or to think about how to plan for crises. So this is just another prompt. We'll come back to this in a little bit, but we wanted to get everyone thinking about this as we go through the rest of the conversation today. Next slide, please. So we did want to just share a little bit about what the Link Center is. And we are so very grateful for the Administration for Community Living for funding this important project. And for folks who have cognitive disabilities, brain injury, intellectual developmental disabilities, who might communicate differently, we know that all too often mental health treatment is difficult to get. Next slide, please. So the Link Center is really hoping to bridge some of those systems so that it's easier for individuals and families and the supporters around individuals to make sure that folks get the mental health treatment they need and the community-based supports that can help them succeed and thrive in their communities. So I'm with the National Association of State DD Directors. And as we were thinking about this project, we quickly realized that no system could do that alone. So we partnered with two organizations, the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors and the National Association of Dual Diagnosis, to jointly lead this effort. But we also knew that we needed many more partners. So importantly, we've got partners representing organizations of individuals with lived experience, so self-advocacy organizations, as well as other state associations, researchers, as well as other folks really knowledgeable about supporting individuals with co-occurring IBD and mental health support needs. So we've got Green Mountain Self-Advocates, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, Communication First, the National Center for START Services, the Sonoran Center for Excellence, and the Ohio State University Nysonger Center as our partners on this. And they all bring really important expertise to help us make sure that as we think about making improvements to access and making improvements to capacity to support people with cognitive and communication differences to access mental health treatment and services, as well as good home and community-based services, that we have our eyes on all the different communities that we want to reach. Next slide, please. The goals of the center are to hopefully make systems change so that we can make sure that we can identify barriers and take them down. We're hoping to make resources available to improve how direct support professionals are able to support individuals who might have mental health support needs in addition to community support needs. We also know that sometimes psychiatrists or social workers or other folks that provide clinical important mental health treatment services may not always have the background of working with people who might communicate differently. And so we're hoping through this effort to improve the clinical capacity or the number of providers who can support individuals in those treatments, to really bolster that, to increase that across the board. And most importantly, perhaps, we just want to make sure that services are available to individuals when they need it, and to really make sure that the services are culturally and provided in a way that people can understand, and that provide both the mental health services, but we know that people need supports and services to live day to day, and to make sure that those community supports are available in a way that really supports the person. Next slide. As I noted, we're hoping to really be guided by the two, you see the two circles or ovals on the left-hand side of the slide. We know that many people don't have access to services and supports, and we know that our systems have to get better at making sure that they consider diversity, equity, and inclusion in every aspect of the services that they provide. So the Link Center work is going to be very focused on providing resources and information that can help improve the diversity, equity, and inclusion to make sure that everyone who has a need has the equal and equitable access to supports and services. We also know that we don't have all the answers, and we want to continually learn. And so you'll see us talking about continuous quality improvement. And what that really means is that we want to hear from folks about what's working and what's not working, and that we can continue to improve the work that the Link Center does to better meet the needs of the community. And you met one of our steering committee members already, Monica Wayford, but we've got 11 other steering committee members who are really providing the important, essentially guiding the work of the Link Center. And in the short time that they've been assembled, they've already made huge impacts on how we think about different topics such as language, about making sure that people have the opportunity to communicate freely, that they have the tools they need to be able to get the help that they need. We're also making sure that we've got a network of folks who are expert in different issues, so that we can continue to learn as a group, because even with all of our partners, we know that we don't know everything, and we want to make sure that we've got really good relationships to help us understand things differently, and to learn as the field grows and learns too. And then we're also really excited about the shared learning groups. And this is our first try with these. And so we're anxious to sort of talk with you today, engage in some conversation at the end of the meeting. But we're also really interested in hearing what worked and what didn't work so that we can continue to make them better. But the shared learning groups are really aimed at having folks come together around a particular topic, sharing information and resources that we hope will also really feed into the website that will be coming soon. We'll have a little more information for you on that. And we'll have a lot of resources available for all audiences. So we want to make sure that we've got tools and information there that individuals who are experiencing a disability and mental health concern are able to use and make that usable and accessible to folks in plain language, on topics that are important to you. But then we also want to make sure that we're sharing a lot of the research that's out there and some of the good practices that might help clinicians get the information that they need to better treat individuals who might be experiencing a mental health crisis or have mental health support needs. So the Link Center is a 5-year project. We've just started year 2, and it feels like we're just getting started. So we're really, really grateful for you spending time with us today. And hopefully this will be the beginning of us getting to know one another. Next slide. So our hopes for the group today are really that, at the end of the day, we hope that we've shared some information about how we're thinking about supporting someone in crisis and different tools that might be available. And that at the end of the conversation, you'll be able to identify why it's important to think about crisis support and planning for people with IDD and mental health support needs. And that you'll know where to find some resources relating to supporting someone in crisis. And we'll be sharing a couple great resources today, as you hear from some of our partners. We're also hoping to get your input related to supporting someone in crisis. So if you've had some tools that you've used before in your life or in support of someone else, we'd love to know how those have been and how they've worked for you. And then we're also going to have a conversation where we can brainstorm solutions around a particular challenge. And that's an exercise we'll do at the end of the conversation together today. So with that, next slide, please. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Stacy Nonamaker. Stacy is the Director of Cross System Strategies at NASDS and does a lot of the leadership work on the Link Center. So Stacy.
Thanks, Mary. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. So great to be here with you all. I'm going to describe myself. I am a middle-aged white woman with brown straight hair, goes about to my shoulders. I'm wearing glasses and I'm wearing a multicolored shirt, greens and blues, and I'm in front of a white background. So we're going to shift the conversation now and really get into the topic that we wanted to bring to you all today, which is supporting someone in crisis. So why are we talking about supporting someone in crisis as it relates to people with IDD and mental health support needs? Well, we know that, and Monica did an amazing job at pointing out that crisis looks different for different people. We bring our experiences, our histories, our perspectives to the table, and really that is our relationship, and that is how we talk about crisis, how we think about crisis. And again, Monica pointed out her relationship to crisis, both personally and professionally. And so to kick us off, And we're going to use the chat. So hopefully, you feel comfortable using the chat. If not, you can ask to come off mute. But to kick us off, we really want to ask you, what is one word, or maybe 2 or 3 words, that you would use to describe what crisis looks like for you as someone with a lived experience? So again, use the chat, think about that, ask to come off mute. What is one or a few words that would describe how you define crisis or what it looks like for you? Overwhelming, frightening, comply to incoherence, overwhelming, meltdown or shut down, so crisis to me means loss of control. Thank you. So I want you all to keep thinking about this, whether you put it in the chat or not. You see some common words, you see some differences, but we really wanted to set the stage, if you will. Again, the point here being that while crisis can be simply defined as a time when things are not okay, what it looks like for you is how it's experienced, and it's very individual, and it's based on a great number of things, including the role that you play, including the relationship that you have to crisis. So as we move through this topic, I want to just give you a reminder to take care of yourself, regulate, calm as you need. And we'll repeat that as just a reminder, just to be kind to yourself throughout today and as we talk about crisis. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Deborah Peinels. Dr. Peinels is a consultant to the Link Center, is a forensic psychiatrist, and also a senior medical and forensic advisor to the National Association for State Mental Health Directors, and has a great deal of experience supporting people with co-occurring conditions and working with public systems. So, Deb, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. And it's great to be here. I'm excited to be a participant in this shared learning group. And we can go to the next slide. And actually, before I begin to go over this next slide, I want to just describe myself. I am a middle-aged woman with short, dark hair, wearing a gray shirt and kind of a silver pearl kind of necklace and a black sweater. And I describe myself as she, her, hers. And where I wear glasses to help me see what I'm trying to read. So let me start by talking about, what is the issue and the need? And you heard some of this already from our prior speakers, but let me just talk about it from the perspective of where I sit. I do work sometimes in the emergency department, and I see psychiatric emergencies. So and I've worked in the crisis space for a really long time, supporting people with all sorts of complex support needs. And what we really have to find a way forward to do is finding options for people with IDD and those mental health support needs so that they can get support and you can get support at every stage of a crisis. And that includes preventing crisis, that includes dealing with the crisis and helping support people through the crisis, and even thinking about what does post-crisis follow-up look like, and stabilization and beyond. And so all of that is part of what we call the crisis continuum, sort of a continuous process where we want to really think about how to help people as needed. And that requires us to train people to support someone in crisis. Now, all too often these days, we see negative outcomes associated with a crisis. For example, in too many communities, police are the first responders, and that can lead to very negative and tragic outcomes from just the police contact to arrest to incarceration and even excessive use of force. And obviously that is something that we really want to see improved and eliminated when it's unnecessary, and really figuring out how to have crisis responders who can respond to a scene or a person in the best way possible, in the least restrictive way possible, and only involve law enforcement when it's really necessary and appropriate. And then also have them have the best possible knowledge for how to work with people with unique needs. We also see that all too often people with IDD and mental health support needs are boarding in emergency departments awaiting hospitalization. Now, emergency departments are very necessary places for emergencies, and we don't want to not use them, but we want to decrease unnecessary use of emergency departments where those are not necessarily going to be the places where people are going to get the best care. Similarly, if somebody needs psychiatric hospitalization, just like if they have a medical condition that needs hospitalization, we want to make sure that they have access to hospitalization. But we don't want to rely on hospitals when that's not necessary to support that person in crisis. So we want to reduce the negative outcomes while we build up the solutions and strategies through connections to supports in the community that can help preserve people's ability to remain in their community, as we all want to do, for as long as possible. We can go to the next slide. Now, with the rollout of 988 as the national 3-digit number that is being promoted and has been around for just over a year now for people in emotional and substance use type crises, we want to make sure that we are centered around what the research tells us and what research is needed going forward, so that we can get those right responses and have more mobile crisis services that are appropriate for the people in need. And so the truth is we don't have a ton of research. 988 is, of course, still new, so more research will be coming. And many of the studies, and we did comb the literature, many of the studies that are grounded in evidence really rely on looking at the crisis continuum as part of a hospital, going to the emergency department. So of course, we're going to see research evolve in that area. But what the research does show is that we need to come together and support and educate people who work at those hospitals. And again, you can translate it to say who also will work in these other settings like crisis stabilization units and other places, to better understand and get more comfortable talking to and caring for people with IDD. As I said, in my own professional experience working in the emergency department, it's all too often the staff there are not really used to or comfortable with talking to or caring for people with IDD. So we really need to do a better job supporting and educating them. And we're hoping the Link Center will provide one of the sources of support. In a paper that I wrote with my colleague, Dr. Matthew Edwards, in 2020 for the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, we really looked at the literature as well and talked about the importance of helping people understand how to deliver person-centered support. Again, not everybody understands what person-centered support is and what it can look like when it's used effectively. Recognizing that every person in crisis, every person is different, and crisis care really reflects those unique differences. Every individual will have their own way of getting them the support that they need. Next slide. Other studies have also shown that some things can make people more likely to end up in the hospital for mental health crises. For example, how somebody's disability affects them, whether they live in the community or in a group home kind of setting, whether they've been to the hospital for a mental health crisis before, that can predict whether they will be back to the hospital for a mental health crisis, and or whether police have been involved, which can also be predictive of whether somebody will end up coming to the hospital for a mental health crisis. Other things that are seen in the literature that make it easier to stay out of the hospital during a mental health crisis include things like having a family doctor who supports the individual with their planning, and or having a crisis plan. And you're going to hear soon about what a crisis plan from one individual can really look like and how it can be used to its full advantage. Next slide. Now, there are emerging models for managing crisis and dealing with crisis, like the START model. Some of you may have heard about that, or certified behavioral health clinics, which are coming out more and more across the United States and have a unique funding mechanism, but also have a mandate to serve anyone who walks in to be able to do that initial assessment. They also have a mandate to supply crisis services and include mobile crisis services and network with community systems like schools and police and others to help improve outcomes for individuals. And what we know from these different models is that there's elements of success that can be very helpful that we should think about as we build out our crisis services. One is that we know that what works is system connections. As I said, having connections to schools, having connections to local hospitals, having connections to the local crisis center, all are going to be really, really important because when an individual shows up with a crisis or in crisis, those systems might need to be leveraged to get that person what they need. The inclusion of physical health, so that we're looking at things, what we call from a biopsychosocial perspective, which includes really integrating. So if someone's struggling with their asthma or their diabetes, at the same time, they're feeling really stressed and in emotional distress, we can look holistically at that individual to give them the best services we can provide. We also recognize that we have to have in the pieces of success of many available services. Somebody might need transportation. They might need housing support. They might need food support, in addition to taking care of the mental health crisis. And so having all of those services at the ready to help support that individual, to help lift them up, is going to be important. Another piece for success seen in these emerging models are trauma-informed supports. We know that people with IDD and mental health needs often have trauma histories. And so the supports that are put in place have to recognize that, honor that, and be trauma-informed in how they deliver services. And then another piece for success is the role of the evaluation. When someone walks in the door in crisis, if I'm doing an evaluation or a clinical assessment of their needs, if I'm not doing it right, if I'm not asking the right questions or tailoring my evaluation to address the IDD and mental health needs of the individual, then it may not work and we may not get to a good plan. And so I need to look at what changes might need to be made in how I approach evaluation. And again, we're hoping to get more resources out to help the field really improve and use these pieces of success to build out the crisis response continuum. Next slide. So what does this mean for people with lived experience? So as I'm speaking, it would be great to see in the chat if you have other ideas for what all this research means to you. Put in the chat any of the ideas that you have, or raise your hand and we can have you be called upon. One of the things we thought about is that for people with lived experience, it's important to have information about how best to communicate and feel supported. And that can help others around them be more helpful. So that if you show up in my crisis service and you provide me with information about how best to communicate with you and how best to support you, it will help me, it will guide me to be more person-centered in how I approach support. Also, crisis planning and the support of DSPs and clinical staff can all work hand in hand as people learn to support the person in need. But we all know that we need to know that we need to work hand in hand. That's what the literature shows, is that we need to offer more education and support to the supporters so that we can all work together. And the last thought we had, certainly not the least, is that sharing important information like one's living situation to understand the context, again, how the person feels most supported, and any information about their history, if they were in prior mental health crises or prior police context, would be helpful as we address that support in response to helping improve future outcomes as well. So is there anything that we missed here? Is there anything that rings true to you, or things that you would like to add related to how the research feels to you, and what other things you might think about? So I'll give a few moments for people to respond. If they choose. It's a lot of information to take in, and we certainly can hear your feedback throughout the presentation. So no pressure on responding immediately, but think about, as you're listening, if there's any information that you think is helpful for people to understand what all this means for your lived experience, that would be fantastic. And with that, I'll take the time now to introduce you to my colleague, Ren Coloni. Ren is hold on one second, let me get the right intro for them. Ren Coloni is a program associate with Communication First, one of the Link Center partners. They developed a guide for people with IDD to learn more about crisis plans, using the knowledge that they've gained from their own lived experience. Ren, it is a pleasure to be able to turn this over to you and to have worked with you, and I'm excited for your presentation. And I'm excited that we have some responses. And maybe I'll just, before you start, Ren, maybe just let me read some of the responses and give acknowledging. So we heard people with lived experience welcome more specialized training to operate in a clinical setting, as well as support. That's a great comment. And then somebody else wrote, I have a specific environment, my apartment, that's evolved as a result of years of personal development, crises, and the living space nurtures, and I can be alone, private, and at best, quiet and productive. I think that's so important to think about, that how our own living space can be that nurturing environment that we need. And that's an important element in crisis response, is honoring and respecting what are the elements in our environment or people or other tools that you'll hear a little bit about from Ren that can help support you in those crises. So with that, Ren, sorry for the delay, I want to turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ren Coloni, and I use they them pronouns. I'm a fat, white, non-binary person with rectangular glasses and soft dark hair, half of it shaved, half of it in a long braid. I'm rocking gently back and forth. I came into this conversation as a program associate with Communication First, a partner of the Link Center. We are the nation's only nonprofit organization, working for the civil rights of everyone in the United States, who cannot rely on speech alone to be heard and understood. Not all people with IDD have speech disabilities, and not all people with speech disabilities have IDD. But across these communities, we have many things in common. The ways we live, think, move, and communicate are so often met with confusion, discomfort, fear, or abuse. And our basic needs, as well as our basic human rights, are not always met and respected. As a result, we tend to carry a high burden of trauma and suffering. Right now, our communities, and our health care systems, are not prepared to help us weather that suffering, or heal from it. The Link Center is doing work that, I believe, will start to change that. As an autistic person with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative conditions, and a handful of other psych disabilities, I know firsthand the importance of this work. In many ways, I've been lucky. I have never been hospitalized or institutionalized for my psych disabilities. Though I am a part-time AAC user, I have never had my voice taken away from me because it was deemed a safety risk, but I do know people who have had that happen to them. And I have a strong support system, able and willing to help me, when I can no longer help myself. Many of us, especially those of us who are unhoused, don't have that support system. So, I count myself lucky. But I've also lost months of time to dissociative episodes, months where I could not care for myself or take part in the world. I've had breakdowns in bathrooms and bus stops, in bedrooms and ballrooms. I've hidden common household objects from myself, so I wouldn't end up in the hospital. And, I did all of this more or less on my own. Seeking care has never been a real option. Maybe I didn't have the money for the copay. Or a psychiatrist told me he didn't know what to say, and that I didn't need to come back. Or a therapist looked uncomfortable, and changed the subject. All my care has, ultimately, come from me, and from a small circle of loved ones. I have survived, but going through it so alone, has been dangerous, painful, isolating, and exhausting. Despite all of this, I still have enormous faith in the power of mental health care. I spent most of my time in college learning how well it works, when we do it right. And I've met so many professionals who really, truly get it. It's impossible for me not to believe in that potential. But I also believe in the tremendous power, and importance, of sharing lived experience. When people with IDD, who have been through crisis and suffering, come together to pool our knowledge, we can create incredible change for each other, and for the peers we haven't met, too. A few months ago, folks from NASD's asked Communication First for our thoughts on supporting people with IDD to navigate crisis. I found I had a lot to say. For example, I pointed out that when we're in crisis, the way we communicate often changes. I usually have access to speech, even if I prefer typing. But in an acute and overwhelming crisis, I have no choice but to type, and even then, my words may be slow, or difficult to understand for people who don't know me. Other people I know, no matter how they communicate when they're feeling well, rely on pictures, gestures, or a person who knows them very well, who can help translate. The people supporting us during crisis need to know how to interact with us, no matter how we're communicating. That means that they also need to know how to respond when I do things they aren't expecting. For example, my rocking, flapping, and slapping helps me stay present in my body. We should never be viewed with fear or disgust for regulating during stress. And we definitely shouldn't be restrained, isolated, or assaulted. But for many of us, ableist mistreatment of all kinds is a looming threat, never too far from our minds. We can't afford to forget about it. Here's an example. I wouldn't feel totally safe calling 988, just because of the chance they could call the police, a situation that would involve dire risks to my health, safety, and life, as a multiply disabled person. 988 is doing a lot of fantastic work to make the chance of police involvement as small as possible. Early data suggests that the chance is less than 2%. That is amazing. But I would still feel infinitely safer calling one of the few lifelines that refuses to contact police under any circumstances, like the Trans Lifeline. Even though it might be a lot less accessible, due to a lack of funding. Or, more likely, I might just decide not to reach out to a lifeline at all. In a mental health care system that can be inaccessible, and even hostile, to people with IDD, I feel strongly that one of the best things we can do is put as many tools as possible directly in our hands. For example, having a crisis plan doesn't prevent or fix crisis all by itself, but it can make it so much easier, safer, and smoother. Working with my lived experience, as an autistic person who has been through, and helped others through, crisis, as well as my academic experience with mental health and disability, I took a look at existing crisis plans, and adapted them into a toolkit, focusing on crisis plans. The toolkit starts by explaining basic ideas about crisis in plain language. It offers tips on what people with IDD may want to include in their crisis plans, based on my experiences. It introduces 988 and defines words that we often hear surrounding mental health crisis. And I included 3 crisis plans that I think work well, along with a short version of one I drafted on my own. When I'm in crisis, I need to know exactly what to do. I don't have the energy or brainpower to try to come up with a plan on the spot. For me, a good crisis plan tells me what steps I need to take, and when to take them. It tells people about the kind of care I do, and don't want, and lays a foundation for some of the decisions I would make, if I were in the right headspace to make them. It also puts everything that other people need to know about me and my disabilities in one place. I also feel strongly that crisis plans should be adaptable for many different kinds of crisis. To me, crisis is stress that is unmanageable, overwhelming, and all-consuming, and that also puts me, or others, in danger of some kind of harm. But the results of that stress are different, depending on many factors. My crisis isn't always about wanting to die. Sometimes, like with my dissociation, it's about not noticing I'm alive in the first place, and being unable to care for myself as a result. Or, it might be a meltdown, a shutdown, autistic burnout, or a response to a trigger. None of these crisis situations is necessarily worse than the other, but a crisis plan can help me, and the people around me, to prepare for each one. This crisis plan isn't based on research, and it shouldn't be taken as medical or legal advice. Instead, it's based on my own experiences with crisis, and my understanding of myself and my community. But, of course, there is no single crisis plan for every person and every situation. Different people need, and want, different things as they navigate their mental health. So, I won't try to offer a one-size-fits-all solution. Instead, I hope this toolkit will guide and inspire people to think about what matters to them and their lives. I hope that people with IDD can feel empowered to talk to people who support them about their mental health and make a plan for the future together. And I hope that people who may not have a strong support network right now will start to feel that they are not alone. Each day, organizations like 988 and local community crisis teams are learning how to support us in ways that honor and respect who we are. And others in the disability community are here for you, too. I think that people with IDD know ourselves best, and that we gather wisdom each time we experience a crisis or go through intense suffering. When we have access to the right tools, we can make the most out of the knowledge we have gained over a lifetime of living in our bodies and minds. And we can begin to make sense of that knowledge to the people who want to help us. This guide certainly doesn't have all the tools we need to heal, but I hope it's a good start. I'd like to thank the Link Center for including Communication First as a partner. If you'd like to learn more about our organization and our work, visit our website at communicationfirst.org. And I'd also like to thank the Link Center's steering committee for the knowledge they're sharing. This is vital work, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. One last thing. To everyone listening who has experienced crisis, I want to thank you, too. I say that the Link Center's work of supporting us is vital, and it is. But the most vital work of all is doing what you can to live and love this beautiful world of ours. Thank you. I'm glad we're here.
Thank you so much, Ren. I appreciate you sharing all of that with us, and also sharing your experience and the time and energy that you put into developing these resources for us. And I know some of you have already asked to see the resources that Ren has developed, and we're going to put them in the chat for you. But I do want to just talk a little bit more about the resources that Ren developed. And, I think Ren talked a lot about some things that you all can consider in planning for crisis that are captured in these resources. So the first resource, What to Do When I Don't Feel Okay, is really a large crisis plan, or I should say a comprehensive or a very thorough crisis plan, step by step. How do we know when I'm not okay? How do we know what support that I need and how I'm going to communicate during this time? So that is the first resource that Stephanie dropped into the chat. So go ahead and download that. Let us know if you have any problems downloading it. And then the second resource that Ren created is called What to Do When I Don't Feel Okay. And these are big ideas. Really, it's a guide for you all around crisis and crisis plans. Starts at what is a crisis? Why does it happen? What's a crisis plan? Why do I need one? And at the end of this resource, and again, that's the second one that Stephanie put in the chat, is a sample short version of a crisis plan. So something that maybe you need in the moment real quick to give somebody. So you might choose to have the shorter version. But really, the intent here is for you to have resources and different types of plans to find one that works for you. And I want to repeat what Ren said, to really think through these things about what you would need if and when a crisis would happen when you're feeling okay, right? And so here are 3 other crisis plans that Ren had identified that are out there. When we send you the PowerPoint, you'll be able to access these 3 crisis plans online, or if you type any of these into Google now, I'm sure they'll pop up for you. But we're going to continue to really keep our eye on what's out there by way of crisis plan and additional information that we'll be sending out, and will be part of the website that Mary talked to you all about. Okay, we're going to switch gears for a moment here, and this is the group exercise that we talked about, and we think that this will be a really good opportunity. This is the sharing part of shared learning groups. This is the we're also learning from you. And in doing that, we're going to center the conversation around a relevant, maybe something that you can relate to situation. So we'll present the situation to you all. And we're interested if anybody would want to volunteer, go off mic, can't go off mute. Sorry, go on the mic, go off mute. Go on camera if you'd like. No pressure with any of that. But what we're going to do is we're going to present the situation, and people who volunteer can help us really think through solutions, can help us think through ideas in how to support this person who we're calling Joy. Joy is her name. So you can volunteer. I'll have Monica in just a moment here read through the situation or issue that Joy is having. And if you don't want to volunteer, if you don't want to go off camera or go off mute, you can also use the chat, and we would love to hear some thoughts and ideas and solutions that you all may have from your own experience, or just from thinking about this situation that we're going to present to you. So again, I'm going to remind you here, this may be something that relates, that you relate to. This may be something that is potentially triggering and hard to hear, but take care of yourself, regulate as you need, calm as you need. So just a reminder to do that in this last piece of time that we're together. Okay, Monica, you want to go ahead and read the Joy's story?
Yes, and I just wanted to say real quick that I see in the chat about getting in the way, mandatory reporting. Mandatory reporting and HIPAA, they do both get in the way when you're seeking help for people with crisis. And I've had this experience many times, and I would hope that the organizations would put together a plan for addressing, or maybe you can become familiar with your agency or organization's plan for dealing with confidential information and privacy. And I also want to put into the chat a resource that I know about, because I also saw in the chat there's someone here who's from a rural community, and I'm familiar with a lot of people who are homeless now, who are quickly making up the homeless population with people with disabilities. So everybody's not going to have a telephone, is what I'm getting at. And I'm also going to put in the chat a resource that I've used in the past on knowing how to work with the homeless. And that's the National Healthcare for the Homeless organization. So I'm going to—
Monica, excuse me for interrupting, and I'm glad that you tended to the comments in the chat. I appreciate that. And what a really great point around mandated reporting, mandatory reporting, HIPAA, privacy. And that's something that we've heard now through the shared learning groups, and something that the Link Center, we're taking back to the Link Center, and something that we're really going to take for action. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Monica.
It's okay. So I'm going to read. Joy has a history of calling the crisis line at least 3 times a week. The crisis workers know Joy lives alone and is very lonely, so they allow her to call in to talk for 10 minutes. Joy's crisis plan includes calling the crisis line if she feels suicidal. Today, she is having suicidal thoughts and is trying to call the suicide prevention line, but they think that she is just doing it for attention. What should Joy do?
Thank you, Monica. And again, is anybody willing to come off mute, come off video, so you can raise your hand, as Stephanie's saying in the chat. You can ask to unmute if you'd like to volunteer and have a conversation with us about, if you were Joy, what would you do? Or if you were Joy's peer, what would you consider would be some solutions or some advice that you would give Joy? Okay, I'm seeing some folks raising their hand. Okay, Mike.
Hello.
And Lords. Okay, great. So if you want, you can turn on your camera. You don't have to.
I don't see the, well, lower the hand first. I call I live in Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, and I will call crisis intervention in the nighttime. And it's being alone and sometimes feeling isolated. And what I do is get a very good sense how busy it is. Sometimes it's staffed with only 2, 3, sometimes only one individual. And I just feel a sense of checking in. Though 3, 4, or 5 years ago, there have been times that, well, it's difficult because of boundaries. I don't really understand often. I'm trying to. I don't feel that I have a legacy. Suicide, if I feel overwhelmed, I do at the moment, actually, because I really adhere and I understand this scenario Joy presents. And I'm trying to speak and understand how it has occurred. Anyway, I'm at home and I spent a lot of my day washing cloth and washing and getting an assignment done that I'm probably sent off tomorrow, and I'm concerned, and I'm going to mute now. How do I do this?
Thank you, Mike. So Mike, I heard as a solution, as a strategy for you, staying busy is helpful. Lourdes, did you want to respond to that?
Yes.
What I want to say is, as somebody who has dealt with depression for over 20 years, I have felt lonely and that I don't connect with people for years. But when I am saying I want to harm myself, I'm expected professionals to know that this is not attention seeking. If they identify that there is suicidal ideation, they need to take their role and their position. You cannot say suicidal thoughts and just let it be this person is just asking for attention. Nobody that has admitted to something as painful as being willing to take your own life should be considered that you're seeking attention, especially from a team of people who are identified as crisis line. They should be able to identify that and take it seriously. And if that person in that line doesn't do it, I would suggest Joy to talk to another crisis support line, because that is very difficult. Like, you don't tell people how you want to harm yourself. How do you have a plan? What are the steps you're going to take in for somebody to consider that you're just trying to get, instead of your regular 10 minutes, a little bit more time? That is offensive to me. And I think once Joy handles her crisis, she should do a formal report and say that that was wrong, but handle herself first and then come back to this violation of whatever code of ethics that they have at this organization. Thanks.
Thank you for that thoughtful response, Lourdes. And one of the things that I want to point out, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but what's very important with Lifeline workers is that they're educated and trained. There was a comment in the chat that I want to mention. Everyone who calls a crisis line is, air quotes, doing it for attention. Oops, sorry, the chat's jumping around on me. But what's wrong with seeking attention or connection? It's a human need. Mike, Lourdes, anyone, any reactions to that?
I try to be careful that example, like if a crisis worker at 3 a.m. is having two other crisis experiences, and he or she may having to parlay officers to an emergency scenario. And I tried to make myself aware of that. Attending to my life, I'd rather do that myself. When other people do that, I feel imposed upon. At the same time, I check in. But in fact, I guess I need to admit I maybe have a reputation in Lancaster City, Lancaster County MHMR, and that's sad. That makes me really sad. And I haven't called for a while, and to be honest with you, I'm concerned I'm going to have a late night tonight because I've got quite an assignment to do for two cares I have, and one of them is maintaining my home, and I've been doing most of that, about 80% of my time today. So anyway, announcement and attention, attending to and making an announcement. So I'm going to, Andrea Callow, thank you, Lords.
Thank you, Mike. I don't know if Lourdes or anyone wants to respond to Mike's point about, relating to Joy's calling the crisis line, relating to how the Lifeline workers are acknowledging Joy and Joy's situation. So if you look, we said Joy lives alone and is very lonely. What are some things that maybe perhaps Joy or perhaps other people in Joy's life could support Joy to do? And in the chat box related to that question, are there services and supports available for Joy to help her make community connections? Sho, you raised your hand. We'll take you off mute.
So I have two different things. One is, at least in my state, if you're eligible and enrolled in whatever in an IDD waiver, you're automatically made ineligible for the behavioral health day programs, which might be really helpful for Joy. And it's one of my biggest pet peeves that the state of Maryland refuses to exist, that people can be dual diagnosed. But the other thing is, we also in Maryland have an extensive network of wellness and recovery centers. And those are open to anybody because they're not billing insurance. So at least, at 3 a.m, that might not be the most helpful thing, but I can tell you half a dozen places within a half-hour drive of me that have either online or in-person support groups right off the top of my head. But you have to know to look for it. And if somebody's getting IDD services, their whole support system is not aware of the other support structures. There's no cross-system education in the state. So if you're not good at digging up the stuff yourself, how's your support system supposed to know?
Thank you for that comment, Cheryl. And another really good comment that we will be taking back to the Link Center for pieces of action on our end. And I want to point out the other comment related to my question about helping Joy make community connections. In the chat, someone said that This speaks to a lack of education on the part of the crisis line. An important part of their job should be knowing local resources that they can share with callers, including places that can help support Joy's need for a social support network. Why not refer her when she is calling in during a time that isn't a crisis to local self-advocacy groups, for example? So Cheryl, to your point about local resources and accessing local resources. Lourdes, you have your hand up again. Go ahead.
So I am blessed that we live in California. So we have the mental health aspect covered through generic resources, which will be like mental health providers. We have a very great team called Wraparound Services. Those are for people who have been in and out of a psychiatric hospitalization, and they're gonna need more follow-up. So they give you wraparound services. But we also have regional center for the specific for people with developmental disabilities. Regional centers only cover 5 different diagnoses, which will be like autism, it could be like cerebral palsy. I forgot the other ones. Sorry, I'm not an expert on them. But what they do is, and one thing that was done just recently, they allow to cover for social recreation activities. So we know Joy needs to be connected to her community. Well, they could pay the local YMCA. She could go to the local support groups for like doing something that she likes, art class, swimming class, whatever it might be that will help her feel connected, establish relationships. And you could advocate, say like, you know what, like I need a personal assistant, a community integration support. That is something that California is doing that I feel is making life-changing moments into everybody that's stepping into like the full plethora of services that are given by regional centers. But that is something very unique to California.
Thanks, Lourdes. You bring up a point that Cheryl already brought up, and that's being eligible for these services that are available, right? So that is a piece that we can be looking at as part of our goal for system change with the Link Center. So thank you for sharing all those services and supports that are available in California, Lourdes. I know that in the chat, somebody said, and if someone gives a resource, they should definitely follow up to make sure the resource was available and helpful. I think that is a really great comment, especially if Lifeline workers, in this case, if they are trained and knowledgeable about what local resources and community connections are available for Joy, maybe following up with Joy, seeing if she was able to access them, seeing if they were indeed helpful. Cheryl, I'm not sure if your hand is still up or if this is a new hand for you. Okay, thanks. I saw you took it down. These are all really, really great ideas and comments around this particular situation. And I know we have just a few minutes left, so I want to just open it up and see if anybody has any general comments for consideration for the Link Center around the idea of crisis planning, crisis support, what's out there, what's not out there, things that we should be thinking about, things that we could be elevating or bringing up to others. You already gave us some really great ideas as we engage with Lifeline workers, which is one of the things that we're doing through the Link Center. Listening to YouTube lectures within my specific interests and responsibility has been useful. Mike, I'm assuming to really find ways to fill your time, meaningful ways to fill your time. I think that's a great idea. Doesn't have to necessarily be out in the community making connections. We can make some other connections virtually, right? Any other thoughts or things that something that hasn't been said that you're really wanting to put out there for us to hear? Let's add social recreation activities as part of everyone's plan. Yeah, Lawrence, and remembering that it's person-centered and individualized. What it looks like for one person may be different for another person, right? WRAP, Wellness Recovery Action Plan, course available internationally and already has plain language version. Thank you. Great resource. The Native American Healing Center has great non-traditional methods without pharmaceuticals. Monica will share that website. And Cheryl, thank you for sharing the WRAP website as well. This is wonderful. Let's move away from clinical centered to self-determined centered philosophies. I love that. Thank you. All really great thoughts, all really great comments. We appreciate those of you who have been engaging, especially around the exercise that we created for you. And really the intent here, you know, oftentimes we get stuck when we're facing an issue or a problem, like in this case, Joy has. And it's so much better when we have other perspectives, other people's ideas and thoughts around it, because sometimes doesn't matter who you are. We sometimes have our own biases. We sometimes get in our own way and just get stuck and can't think outside of the box or think of solutions or think of strategies to move forward. So this exercise is just to show that we all just collectively came up with some really amazing ideas, things that Joy can be thinking about, things that the crisis workers could be thinking about to support Joy. So again, it's about widening our lens. It's about thinking bigger, thinking outside of ourselves sometimes, and sometimes it's bringing other people in so that their eyes and their good thoughts and brains are also helping you think about that. Okay, so I know all along and just here in the last few minutes, you've been putting in some resources and information into the chat. If there are any other resources, trainings, information that you go to for yourself when you think about crisis and crisis planning and crisis support, please continue to put that into the chat. We'd really like to take all of this information. We're going to take all this feedback, everything that you all said today, and we're going to sit with it, and we're going to take the resources and vet them and really elevate them and put them on the website, if that makes sense. And the other comments and information that you bring up, those are pieces of information that we're going to take for action as the Link Center. So Mary talked about the website that we're developing as the Link Center, where we're so very excited for it. That is coming soon. And until it's available, you can contact us here at the Link Center at NASDs.org. We welcome you reaching out to us. We want to hear your experiences. We want to get any resources or information that you want to share with us. So please feel free to email us there. And we will have some more shared learning groups. So we'll have another shared learning group in January, and we will talk about trauma and supports for trauma. In April, we'll focus on transitions. So not just life transitions, like moving from being a youth to an adult, but also settings transition, perhaps moving from a hospital to a community placement. And then in August, we're going to talk about supporting the whole person, about how important it is to have all the right players at the table, how important it is to look at supporting someone holistically, that integrated care, if you will. So please keep your eye out for the invitations and please join us for those shared learning groups. Dr. Pinels brought up a couple resources when she talked about the research. We put them in here for you as well. And finally, just big thank you to Monica and Ren for sharing their stories and their experience and their thoughts around the importance of crisis planning, and some considerations for us all in supporting someone to navigate a crisis. Also, thank you to Emily Brown, who's also on the steering committee, was an important part to developing this content, but unable to be with us today. And to all of our partners at the Link Center to contributing to preparing for this meeting and all the other meetings that we have. Everyone has been amazing. And I think that across the 4 meetings from yesterday and today, we've learned so much, and it's been so wonderful to hear from you all. So just a last piece of housekeeping. There will be a follow-up email sent to you. It will have all the resources that were in the chat that we put there. So there were 2 resources there that we shared. We'll also share the recording and the transcription and the PowerPoint. Now, we already know that you have given so much time to be here with us and talk with us about supports for crisis, but we're also going to be sending you an evaluation. And we acknowledge and we know that the shared learning groups will evolve, may change over time, because what we want to do is we really want to meet your needs. We want to make sure that this is a place where we can talk with the different communities in which the Link Center is going to be valuable for. So please take the time to fill out the evaluation. We will be looking at these and it will inform our work moving forward. So thank you all for taking time out of your day. Thank you for these wonderful thoughts and comments in the chat, as well as those of you who shared your comments and came off a mute. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. So very wonderful being with you all. Take care.